Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and of course, our general joy of being alive. And we always have to talk about sustainable design as well. Today, we're going to talk about indoor air quality. I'm going to introduce you to Renée Jacobs, who is with both DisTech and Atrius, and she'll explain what the two companies do in just a moment. But first of all, Renée, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this as it's one of my passions.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I remember back taking my first environmental engineering course in university, and the prof opened on day one with a little spiel that basically said, you know, you can go for weeks without food, you can go for days without water, you can go for just a few minutes without air, right? So air quality is absolutely critical. And, you know, building automation is in general is a very important topic. So we're going to dive into that today. Renée, let's talk about you first. Let's get to know you. Tell us about your background and tell us about the path that brought you to Atrius and DisTech.
So it's a little bit of not a straight line path. And I think most of us have not had straight line paths throughout our career. I actually started in this industry in the construction field and worked for a general contractor, was out in the field managing projects. So I learned a lot about how construction and buildings are put together. I found out real quickly that I had a passion for healthcare construction. I was asked to be an owner's rep for a new replacement greenfield hospital in Kansas City, which is where I live. They decided they needed somebody to really watch the project from the field, understand what was going on, do the equipment coordination. And I loved the complexity of healthcare construction. It was a challenge. I was in my 20s and I found it to be intriguing and challenging all at once. So I continued working on healthcare construction, learned facilities management by default. And this is something that many times we don't understand is when we're building these buildings, what does it take to operate them? What is a building automation system? What do we have to do to maintain this building that we just built? And so I had the opportunity to learn how to operate the building, manage the facility staff while I had, right after I'd finished one of my main projects, this Greenfield Hospital. So again, a little bit of a jagged path to get to where I am. And I continued to work in the healthcare space up to the point where I was a vice president of facilities and construction for 11 hospitals in Kansas City. And then in that process, I was given the responsibility for sustainability. And I like to tell the story or spend a minute telling the story because it was not anything that was really ever on my radar. And the CEO called me into his office and said, I want you to take over sustainability. And so I literally had to start reading books and understanding what that really meant. And so I became very passionate about that. After working for this hospital, I had an opportunity to go to work in the building controls and HVAC industry as a healthcare director, which is what led me to DisTech Controls. So in 2020, I started talking to DisTech about a role where they needed somebody to lead healthcare and be business development manager for their healthcare vertical. So here I am, and it's really been exciting to see the changes in the industry just over the time that I've been involved more intimately with sustainability in buildings. And with our Atrius platform, what we have the ability to do, not just with the building automation, but with the energy and sustainability platform and the analytics to be able to help customers, not just in the healthcare space, which is where I focus my time, but help customers really manage their buildings better and drive their energy and sustainability goals.
Introducing Solera Reserve from Advanced Glazings, making luxury homes even more beautiful and more healthy using cool, controlled natural light. Well, let's go big picture first. Let's start by making sure that everybody understands the language we're speaking. How would you define building automation for us, Renee?
So I want to talk a little bit about this because it gets confused sometimes. So building automation is gathering all the sensory input, the data. It actually is making physical actions to modulate equipment. So it's the system that manages all of the HVAC, so the air handling units, the pumps, the chillers, the boilers, all of the equipment that makes up the HVAC system, lighting, security. It can encompass many different systems. And then the building management system is the system that processes the data, makes decisions, issues commands, etc. So sometimes those words are used interchangeably, but they're really not. The building automation is automating all the actions hopefully using AI to automate those actions, and building management is really taking care of managing the data and making decisions and using analytics for that as well.
All right, well, let's go down a layer and talk about IAQ, indoor air quality. How does building automation impact IAQ?
So it's really essential and fundamental to maintain and manage the indoor air quality. So when we talk about the systems monitoring and adjusting key factors, they're going to adjust ventilation, filtration, humidity, monitor and sense CO2 levels to be able to add more fresh air into a space if the CO2 is getting high, or if we have volatile organic compounds, VOCs, in the air, we can bring in more fresh air and exhaust that air. It enables us really to be proactive rather than reactive to our IAQ and manage that in a more proactive and automated way.
Right on. Okay. Here's, I don't know, I'll call it a fun question. What aspect of IAQ worries you the most? Like, if the system failed horribly, what would be the aspect of IAQ that, you know, we should be most concerned about?
I have to defer and give credit to a friend of mine, Dr. Stephanie Taylor, who has done a lot of research in this space. She took I think 8 million data points and said, well, how are we impacting patients in the healthcare space? What is the one thing that impacts them the most? And the thing that came back was proper humidification. And the humidification impacts the airborne particulates, how much they can move around, if they're in the air versus falling to the ground. There's just so much in that space. So she really is the pioneer of being very much an advocate for humidification and proper humidification. I believe that in addition to that, there's the air pressure relationships in healthcare are absolutely critical aspects to prevent healthcare associated infections. And I think to answer that comprehensively is there's not just one factor. It is the
Right.
ventilation, making sure we have enough fresh air in the space. But based on studies and research that has been done for the Buildings for Health and Dr. Taylor, I would say proper humidification really would be the number one thing I would look for if I was in a space.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I really thought that was going to be harder for you to answer, but you guys have done your homework already, so you're completely ready for me. There was no him and hawing, no hesitation. Great answer. I appreciate that. Let's talk about a trend that is very interesting to me, and of course, it's your bread and butter, Renee, and that is, knowledge. It's the information that's become available to owners and to occupants and building managers. And this is a trend in IAQ and all aspects of building measurement. Can you tell me about what information Atrius and DisTech in combination, and DisTech is the actual controlling equipment, Atrius is the software that gathers the information from the DisTech equipment. Is that correct?
You are correct.
Okay, so tell us about what kind of information we can collect now with Atrius. And, the second part of that question, which is maybe the more interesting one, are the owners, occupants, maintenance guys knowledgeable enough to make use of all that new information?
Well, that's a lot to unpack here. So
It
I'll
is.
start with the first part of it. So our solutions include we're looking at adaptive control to prevent failures, to make sure that we are maintaining that indoor air quality and all the parameters of that. So we have actionable data within the building management system that tells us what the VOCs are. We have sensors. We have a new Resense Move sensor that I'm super excited about that does sense volatile organic compounds. It senses temperature, humidity. It does people counting. And this is one thing that I think we can use that data to not only visualize in our dashboards through our Atrius platform, but give alerts and make changes in the building management system to accommodate for the number of people in a space. We all breathe out when we're talking and breathing. And so when we bring a lot of people, say, into a waiting room in a hospital, we can have the building management system modulate how much fresh air it's bringing in, what the temperature is in that space, lower the temperature when you know that you've got high occupant load, because we have these sensors that are counting the number of people using heat mapping technology. So we can actually count the number of people in the space and make changes in the building management system. So within our platform, we have the ability to look at that data, to modulate the BMS, to accommodate what's going on in that physical environment. So the second part of your question was really around facility managers and the maintenance staff that are working in the space. Do they really understand this? Are they knowledgeable about how this is important? And I would say, and I'm going to focus my response a little more in the healthcare space because
Okay.
that's the majority of my focus and knowledge base. The American Society for Healthcare Engineering has been doing a lot of creating programs. They have a lot of efforts around educating the facility maintenance staff. That's not just around sustainability and why it's important, because based on a 5% profit margin for a hospital, for every dollar we save in energy, it's equivalent to $20 of patient revenue. So it is much easier to reduce your energy consumption to save money for the healthcare organization than to bring in more patient revenue dollars. So that's been a large education effort through our national association. And also within that education is making sure that the maintenance staff understand how to maintain the equipment, to keep it optimized so that we have equipment that can modulate with the requirements in the space. And I'll give a little example. If we have an air handling unit where our automation is not working correctly and we don't have the ability to change the flow or change the temperature the way we need to, it makes it almost difficult or impossible for the staff to manage that space effectively. So there's a lot of education around that in that space right now. And I think that we have more awareness and a larger focus because hospitals need to save money. They're not running at a 5% operating margin. Most hospitals are at half to 1% operating margin. So very narrow margins. They're very conscious of how they're spending their money and making sure that everybody's being as judicious as they can with the money that's being spent.
Right on. Now, how is AI playing into that now, Renee?
There is a large push, and I would say we're not there yet. It's a path
Yeah.
and we're working on it. But utilizing AI for modulating equipment and predictive maintenance as versus just going in and maintaining equipment on a schedule. So we've been able to move away from a lot of scheduling aspects to utilizing actual data and information that's being input, processed through AI, and then taking care of our equipment, giving us alerts ahead of time that this equipment is nearing its runtime that where we're going to need to do this maintenance to maintain it optimally. So AI is really utilizing those sensors, and we use AI within our Resense Move monitor that I was mentioning, where we do people counting. So we're doing people counting through heat mapping technology, and that's all through AI to be able to determine if that is an actual person or if it's the heat coming off of a laptop.
Right. Since you mentioned heat mapping, I have to ask, given that you're doing heat mapping, will the software be able to help in an emergency situation, in an evacuation, or to know, heaven forbid, an active shooter situation where if you know where everybody is?
These sensors have the technology embedded in them so that we can identify people versus equipment and identify how many people are in a space. I believe that the use cases around that Resense Move or that heat mapping technology and using AI to determine who's in the space, how many people. There are so many different use cases for that. An example in education, we're using that for classrooms. Instead of
Right.
using a traditional occupancy sensor where somebody may come in to grab some supplies or grab an extra chair, clean the floor, whatever that might be, instead of using an occupancy sensor where we're modulating the ventilation or increasing ventilation when we see an occupancy, like one person in the room, we can determine if that room's actually being utilized because we can look at the number of people and determine is it actually being in use and how many people are occupying that space.
Right on. Yeah. Basically, you could do anything you want once you have that information. Yeah. Okay. I was just curious as to if that is something that you've turned your eyes and your mind to in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, there's a lot of wonderful things happening in terms of knowledge. My biggest fear, and I'm rambling a little bit here, but what I've seen in sort of modern times in the world of the days of big data is that we've got tremendous amount of data and so few people that know what it means. So anytime you have a system, AI was an inevitable next step from big data is that with all that information, we have to figure out what it actually means. So it's cool that you guys are, looking at how to use it properly.
And I would say, in concert with that, it's not just that we have all this data in this big data lake, is how clean is our data? How actionable is our data? So we can capture all this data, but it's really making sure that we're using the correct data, accurate data, cleaning up that data and using it so that we can be better, have better buildings, better efficiency, safer spaces.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Yeah, I love it. All right, big question. So, the world kind of changed about 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago, when the pandemic started. All of a sudden, air quality, indoor air quality became the most important thing for a while. And, I guess at least 3 years later on now, closer to 4 years later on, how much did the industry change after COVID?
The industry, wow, it really took indoor air quality from something we talked about and was in the background to where it elevated the focus on that, the knowledge around it. We were all trying to learn as much as we could about it and not just learn about it, but organizations started investing in it, which we hadn't seen in the past. Very large investments in indoor air quality. We didn't really talk about it. We knew it was a factor on occupant health and well being, but we didn't focus on it, didn't spend money on it. And I think that was the biggest pivot and change that happened during that time is that we became very aware. And I'm aware if I'm in a building where it's stuffy, and it used to be, oh, I'm in a stuffy waiting room, or I'm in a building that kind of smells stale or feels stale. And we didn't think about how it impacted our health and well being. And that time period really made us aware that it does directly impact our health. And again, going back to proper humidification, I learned so much from Dr. Taylor about how important proper humidification is and how we can stay well if we keep our humidification between 40 and 60%. the incidence of getting sick or contracting airborne viruses is much less. So the demand shifted, and we really went from all this sensor driven, let's just look at our sensors, we have the information, but we're not really going to act on it, to responsive systems where we were starting to make sure that we were getting enough ventilation, enough fresh air in the building. And again, I'm going back to my healthcare background, that this has always been a focus because there's regulatory requirements from ASHRAE and all the other regulatory bodies that we have a certain number of air changes. So we're changing out the entire volume of air in a space in a hospital, say an OR, a surgical suite. And we're taking the entire volume of that air every hour and changing it out 20 to 26 times. And we have to provide proper pressure relationships. Well, that's been a forefront in healthcare because it's been driven by code, building codes, by ASHRAE codes. And I think that if we put more of a focus on it, we started realizing we had to get more fresh air into certain rooms where we had airborne infectious isolation patients. And so there were hospitals that didn't have the ability to do that within their existing HVAC systems or their existing building management systems. So there was literally a lot of people that were doing everything they could to modify buildings with what they had and getting exhaust fans and putting holes in, windows and opening up windows to exhaust air out to make sure that they were maintaining that quality to keep the patients and the staff safe.
Something just popped into my head, Renee, and I know it might be kind of an unfair question, and you can tell me to go jump in a lake if you want, and just choose not to answer.
Lake. I'll tell you the data lake.
The data lake. It's a completely hypothetical question, but knowing what we know now, right, what we've learned in these past few years and what we've developed in these past few years as far as technology and systems and methodology, how different do you think the pandemic would have been? Like if it happened tomorrow, the same pandemic, how different would things be, do you think?
I think we'd be slightly more prepared. I'm not going to say 100% more prepared. In the healthcare space, I'll give an example. I worked for a healthcare organization in the early 2000s. And we had an opportunity because we were renovating an entire floor of the hospital. And we had an opportunity to make that entire floor negative air pressure, which is where we're exhausting all the air out of that space to protect the other environments and the other occupants in adjacent spaces. And I went to the leadership of that hospital and said, we're putting in new air handling systems. We're renovating this entire floor. We can make all of these rooms negative pressure within the building management system in the event there was a situation where you had a lot of airborne infectious isolation patients. And the leadership at that hospital at the time told me, we'll never see that in our lifetime. Don't do it. It was at the time about an $80,000 investment. I can assure you the amount of money they spent to be able to create that same number of rooms for patients during the pandemic was in the millions of dollars.
Wow.
And so we are, I think, going to be a little more prepared. We're going to have policies and procedures in place, especially in the healthcare space, because our healthcare environments are what we have to keep open during those times. We can close office buildings and other buildings, but healthcare has to stay open regardless of what's going on. And so we'll be a little more prepared. There's going to be, every hospital is going to have a policy and procedure of how they respond. They're going to have the ability to make shift different areas. And the other piece that's really ties back to DisTech controls and Atrius is that we're going to have the programming already built into our building management system to be able to modulate the air and the air quality and the ventilation and bringing in more fresh air. Whereas in the past, we didn't have those, what I call the pandemic mode within the building management system, where you could go in and very easily modify that building management system.
It becomes configuration rather than a full sort of, renovation. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. One more question on this vein, because you answered it so beautifully. Let's talk about what we could do or what we should do to go from a little more prepared to a lot more prepared. Just give me like the one or two big ones that come to mind right away, Renee.
As we're designing new facilities, we have to keep this in mind. And I think every designer who's in this space today is thinking about that. What do we need to do for the next time or a similar situation? From a design perspective, we have to be thinking about this, and we have to have tools in place for the building operators to manage that building during those times. And those tools are within our building management system and our software platforms to be able to do that. So I think design wise, we need to be thinking about it. The people operating the facilities need to have plans in place. They need to have that emergency response plan that says, I've got this supplier that has these particular pieces of equipment in stock. I'm going to be able to get that quickly, or I'm going to have that warehouse somewhere because someday I'm going to need it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's talk about another sort of hot topic these days, and it's more on the sustainable side of things, Renee, natural ventilation. I've had multiple people on the show having conversations about natural ventilation. How's the building automation industry, building management industry responding to this new methodology, which is an old methodology, but it's back in vogue again? What are you guys doing to adapt to this trend?
So we're using sensors to be able to see if there is an operable window. Is that window open, closed? We're using weather data. We're using the indoor air quality threshold. So we're using all this data as well as sensors to be able to understand when we are bringing fresh air into the building, how do we modulate our system? How do we make changes? What are those changes going to be able to utilize that fresh air coming from an open window and not tax our existing HVAC systems. So, an example, I live in Kansas City. If I open my window right now, it's going to bring a lot of humidity into my space. And then my air conditioner is going to have to run to take that humidity back out of the air. So, we have to be aware of that as well. And so, that's where these sensors where we're sensing not just whether the window is open or closed, but we're sensing what is the humidity level in the air, what is the temperature, and then we're letting the building management system adjust appropriately to accommodate for those different parameters.
Right. You know, it's funny. Well, I'm a huge fan of natural ventilation, but I was talking to somebody on the show fairly recently that designs heating and cooling systems for skyscrapers. And he brought up flame spread. It's like if you've got natural ventilation in the skyscraper and the windows open, that's your methodology, your source for spreading to the next floor up and the next floor up and so on. So, yeah, there's a lot of complexity to these methods. They seem very intuitive and logical, and to a great extent they are, but our current construction methods have made them a lot of these things such that we do have to think it through. It's not as entirely obvious as you would think. How do you feel about that?
You were exactly right. The systems that we have, our HVAC systems, not always are designed to balance the mechanical ventilation and the natural ventilation to maintain comfort and compliance. And it is the smoke and flame spread issue, or the humidity that we're bringing in. I know that recently we've had smoke in the air from fires in Canada. And so, are we bringing in other particulates? Are we bringing in other things into our environment that our mechanical systems are going to have to accommodate to clean that out of the air or adjust to accommodate that? Now, in an ideal world, we'd have the fresh air coming in would be perfectly clean, fresh air,
Right.
and we would be able to utilize that for our spaces effectively. So I think it really depends upon the building. If I'm in a school building and it's this time of the year and it's right now 63 degrees out, I'm going to be opening the windows and getting the students fresh air.
Right.
If I'm in a hospital, I'm not going to have the ability, the windows are not going to be operable. I'm not going to have the ability to do that for a patient because I don't know what I'm going to be bringing in that could impact that patient negatively.
Right. Okay. All right. I change gears just a little bit here. I come from the world of daylighting. And so, whenever I can sneak in a question about natural light, I always do. Does your system manage lighting controls as well? And is daylighting a consequential part of the work you guys do?
So, a little history about DisTech Controls. We are a part of Acuity, which is the largest lighting manufacturer in North America. And our controller is the Enlight controller that controls the Acuity
Oh,
lighting.
okay.
So, DisTech was purchased by Acuity in 2015 because of our controller. So, yes, we integrate lighting controls, shade controls, daylight harvesting, everything we can into our automation platforms.
Fantastic. How often is this coming up, Renee? How often are you being asked about daylighting and lighting control to optimize the energy savings from daylighting?
Very frequently,
Okay.
we have a big push to reduce the energy consumption of our buildings. Our buildings are the largest consumer of energy. So, if we can utilize what we naturally have, which is natural daylight, and reduce the lighting load within the space to save energy and modulate that based on lighting levels. So, I mentioned our new Resense Move, and that monitor did actually looks for lighting levels as well. So it can talk to the building management system and adjust the lighting levels based on how much light's coming in from the windows.
I love it. Is there a relationship at all between the natural light coming in, any sort of like disinfecting properties? We know UV has a disinfecting property in high concentrations, but just sort of the, regular ambient light levels from sun. Do you know anything about the interplay in terms of IAQ and sunlight? Does that come up at all?
Interesting. And I don't know that I can answer this
Yeah.
100% accurately. What I can say is that most glass in the built environment blocks out most of the UV rays.
Mm.
And we know that UV is what kills viruses, bacteria on surfaces.
Mm.
We're not getting the UV into the space. We're getting the light and the heat load, and not necessarily the UV rays that would treat the particulates in the air that we're trying to eliminate.
Right. Yeah, you get some, but it's not quite
Not
enough
enough.
for sure. So let's go to the $1 million question, Renee. We've come to that point in the episode. There's a question I ask every single guest, all right? And I ask them to answer that question from whatever perspective they'd like. All right. So here goes. What makes a great building?
A great building, in my perspective, is one that's responsive to the occupants, to the environmental conditions. It's efficient, it's sustainable, it's healthy for the occupants, and it's future ready, because we don't know what AI is going to be able to do for us in the future. We have some ideas, but I don't think we fully understand what that capability is going to do yet. So making it future ready and being able to adapt to those occupancy needs. So if we're built on an open platform like a DisTech Controls platform, we have that long-term flexibility. We have that ability to change with the times. Our controllers have an AI chip on board. So being future ready, I think it is really critical, especially when we're investing a lot of money in our built environment.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. All right, before we go, one last thing for you. Do you have any announcements or anything exciting that you want to talk about or promote, Renee, that we didn't cover?
I'd like to, well, promote, sure. I've talked a lot about our Resense Move. It is something that I think is going to be a game changer in the space to be able to monitor all these parameters and affect our indoor air quality. We're really excited about the utilization of AI within that Resense Move, as well as our new tools that are embedded in our DisTech Controls platforms, as well as our innovation through our Atrius platform. I'm super excited about the future of that, what we have today for energy and sustainability, and then the future of what we're going to be able to do to enhance that indoor air quality, automating it more, and also having that occupant engagement. So we have a lot of things that are coming in the future, a lot of exciting things. And we say we're positioned at the intersection of sustainability and technology to provide better health, better spaces, and better efficiencies. And I think that our company, it's not just our motto, it's not a tagline, it's what we really do every day and our day to day work within the built environment.
Renee, I learned a whole lot today. I'm so glad that you came on the show. I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing what the future brings for us all.
Oh, of course, we'll stay in touch. All right, you take care.
Thank you. You as well.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.